Hong Kong police are caught on camera cornering a preteen, then pushing her to the ground. Police accuse the girl of illegal gathering. The U.S. considers blacklisting China's biggest chipmaker. It could impact China's ability to build its own domestic industry. A suicide note goes viral online. It belonged to a woman from Inner Mongolia protesting against Beijing's attempt to replace the Mongolian language with Chinese in schools. She's not the only one who's died so far. And top U.S. officials voice differing stances on whether China is the biggest threat to the upcoming presidential election. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Hong Kong police arrested nearly 300 people on Sunday, among them a 12-year-old who said she was out buying art supplies at the time. NTD's Juliet Song has more on that.
Hong Kong police are under fire for arresting a 12-year-old girl. Video shows the police asking the girl to stand still. Then she started running. But the police were quick to force her to the ground, one of them almost sitting on top of her. The girl's brother tried to help her stand up, but both were pinned down. Local media said the girl later went to a hospital to get treatment for light injuries. The police fined her for breaching social distancing rules. Footage of the arrest went viral on social media. A Hong Kong media columnist tweeted the video, saying, "I wish I could say this isn't normal in Hong Kong today, but it is." Hong Kong police later issued a statement. It said the girl and other protesters were participating in a prohibited group gathering. The girl told Hong Kong media that she was out buying art supplies and ran away because she was scared by the police officers coming at her. On the same day, Hong Kong police arrested around 300 demonstrators, mainly for illegal gathering. This is one of the largest single-day arrests since Beijing imposed the national security law in June. The demonstrators had taken to the streets to protest the law and the delayed elections. Hong Kongers had expected to elect their lawmakers on Sunday, but the city's leader Carrie Lam postponed it by a year, citing public health concerns. It's a blow to Hong Kong's pro-democracy camp. The group hoped to win a majority in the Legislative Council this year. They accused Lam of using the CCP virus to delay an election the government could lose. During demonstrations, protesters chanted "Liberate Hong Kong," a slogan banned under the national security law. But one demonstrator said people will still express their thoughts and feelings.
Because right now the protest is banned by the Hong Kong government. So we have to fight for the space to voice out what we care, what we want to talk about.
Police also fired pepper bullets at protesters. A journalist fainted after being hit by the bullets, and the person was sent to an ambulance. Juliet Song, NTD News.
The richest man in Hong Kong, Li Jiachen, plans to sell 2 properties in Beijing and Shanghai. They're worth over $7 billion combined. Their sale will serve to further distance him from China. Among Hong Kong businessmen, Li was counted among those with very close relations to Beijing. That's because he's invested the most in mainland China compared to the rest of them. But after the current head of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping, took office in 2013, Li decided to weaken his ties with mainland China by selling his properties. Since then, he sold many of his estates in China and Hong Kong for about $15 billion. At the same time, he started to invest large amounts of money in Western countries like the UK. Many people were puzzled as to why Li started selling his properties in China and later in Hong Kong during the real estate boom at that time. But now many businessmen are following suit amid the major changes in China-Hong Kong relations. Now we take a look at a new development in the protests happening in China's Inner Mongolia region. Beijing's attempts to promote the Chinese language in schools has triggered even more protests. It's considered an attempt to replace the Mongolian language, part of China's efforts to erase traditional culture. Even some of Mongolia's public officials who work for Beijing have refused to send their children back to school. September 1st was said to be the first day of the new school year, but many schools remain empty. A leaked document shows the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, ordered Mongolia's public officials to send their children to school on September 7th. It added that those who fail to do so will be punished. As for what that punishment might entail, the document says the local CCP branches will suspend anyone who doesn't comply from their jobs and salaries. It adds they'll be held strictly accountable in accordance with the law, which is set by the Communist Party. But the penalties will also extend beyond those who refuse. The leaders of the CCP group that the offender belongs to, in other words, his or her boss, and community will also be held responsible. Two more of the document's directives also stand out. First, it defines all public officials not just as regime officials. It also includes all personnel from public institutions, like doctors and nurses from state-run hospitals, teachers, and those who run state-owned enterprises. That is, all of those who are paid by the regime. Second, the document stipulates that the heads of any company or organization where violators work will be held accountable. The move effectively forces leaders to pressure and monitor their employees to ensure they fall in line. Aside from professionals and regime staff, students can also be punished. A video circulating online shows an Inner Mongolia school teacher beating a student. It was said that the student had refused to return to school after its chosen language was changed from Mongolian to Chinese. But he was eventually forced to come back. In the clip, the teacher was speaking Chinese. According to Radio Free Asia, hundreds of Mongolians have so far been arrested. At least one Mongolian vice district head, one police chief, and two school principals have resigned in protest. 4 people have died since the region's protests were sparked. Amid the unrest, a suicide note written by a now dead protester is circulating online. Ms. Serna, a Mongolian employee of a CCP committee in southwestern Inner Mongolia, jumped from her residential building last Friday. She was killed by the fall. Based on the note, her decision appears to be a form of protest against Chinese authorities' new language policy. According to Radio Free Asia, Ms. Serna wrote, "We have a small population in Alsha and cannot unite. We have tried to petition the regime, but it was suppressed even before it reached the local government. The CCP has already used all kinds of methods to stop us from petitioning the government. Our Mongolian language staff have received even greater pressure. We may be stupid, we may be weak, but stop scolding us. We have proven with our lives that we have already tried to stand up." In an audio statement via WeChat, her husband said that Mongolians in his area are as determined as Mongolians anywhere else to stand up against the communist regime.
With the deepest pain and sorrow, I say this is who we Mongolians are. My fellow Mongolians, this is a new round of the Cultural Revolution. My dear Mongolian brothers and sisters, I just would like to say to you that we Alsha Mongolians are as determined as Mongolians anywhere else.
Serna's death is the 4th amid the protests, which began a week ago in an effort to preserve their native language. The first with a 5th grade elementary school student who jumped from a school building after learning that his mother had been beaten by police. The second and third were suicide protests committed by a teacher and a farmer. China's largest chipmaker could be blacklisted by the U.S. A Pentagon spokesman said the Trump administration is considering clapping export restrictions on China's top chipmaker, SMIC. The Department of Defense is considering adding the company to the U.S. entity list, which would restrict U.S. companies from selling SMIC tech without a license. SMIC issued a statement in response over the weekend, saying it was in complete shock over the news. While no specific reason was given for the action, the Pentagon has warned in the past that the Chinese regime's tech, including semiconductors, are likely to benefit China's People's Liberation Army. It echoes similar sanctions the U.S. clamped on Huawei, barring U.S. companies from selling to the U.S. firm. The U.S. last month blacklisted 24 Chinese firms and individuals alleged to be part of construction and military actions in the South China Sea. SMIC shares fell on Monday following the potential ban, the stock down by over 17% in Hong Kong. And as the U.S. increases pressure on the Chinese regime, it's also looking into its own agencies for China-related funding. According to a Reuters exclusive, the White House asks U.S. government agencies to detail all funding that supports or counters the Chinese regime. That's based on an August 27th White House Office of Management and Budget document seen by Reuters. Titled Strategic Competition with China Crosscut, the document asks all U.S. agencies to give extensive details on federal funding that supports China or counters China's unfair competition and malign activities and influence globally. China has denied such allegations. The document, meanwhile, includes examples such as funding to counter the One Belt, One Road initiative, the Chinese military, or others like 5G tech, funding for the CDC and other such health programs in China. Such funding, under review, goes back at least a decade. U.S. agencies are to respond by September 21st. China is retaliating against the U.S. with a new wave of visa restrictions on U.S. media outlets. The Foreign Correspondents Club of China, or FCCC, posted a series of tweets announcing visa bans on U.S. journalists working in China. According to the thread, at least 5 U.S. journalists from major media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, CNN, and Bloomberg, were targeted. Instead of getting visas, the journalists got letters granting them temporary status instead. According to China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, these letters can be revoked at any time. The FCCC said the Chinese regime explicitly said the move comes in response to the visa restrictions placed on Chinese journalists working in the U.S. The group expressed dismay at the move, adding it is quickly becoming the darkest year yet for media freedoms. Now to China's influence on the U.S. Among the countries seeking to interfere with the U.S. election, some high-ranking officials say China is running the largest and most active campaign of them all. But not all officials agree.
And again, we know that the Chinese have taken the most active role, but the Russians and the Iranians and other countries are involved as well.
In August, U.S. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien said the United States has found Chinese hackers targeting U.S. election infrastructure. U.S. Attorney General William Barr also reported something similar. Last Wednesday, he told CNN that China is a bigger threat than Russia when it comes to alleged interference in U.S. elections. He added that he's seen intelligence and that's what he's concluded. But Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden and Democratic chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, have both adopted another opinion. On Friday, the former vice president said he didn't agree that China was the most major threat to the November election. That's as Schiff told CNN on Sunday that Barr is lying and misleading the American people. U.S. presidential campaigns are in full swing, but in the meantime, Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party legislator Wang Tingyu revealed that social media app WeChat's so-called Chinese Circle group has started circulating something curious: voting guidelines for Chinese Americans designed to help Joe Biden win the election. Wang posted a screenshot of a document on Facebook, which reportedly details the number of Chinese American citizens who live in the 4 U.S. swing states. The chart also lists a budget breakdown for mobilization to stop President Trump from being re-elected. Wang further pointed out that these screenshots are from the Chinese WeChat circle in the U.S. The social media group is reportedly inviting Chinese Americans to join a project, promising that they'll earn hundreds of thousands of dollars by sending messages and building connections with influential people. It's also said that if Trump is re-elected, Chinese companies like telecoms giant Huawei, video sharing app TikTok, tech giant Tencent, and e-commerce website Alibaba will suffer greatly. A Chinese professor and government advisor suggests that Beijing should weaponize active pharmaceutical ingredient exports as revenge of Washington's further tightening sanctions policy on Huawei.
Tsinghua University professor Li Daokui recently suggested that Beijing may consider weaponizing drug precursors and raw material exports. That's as Washington further tightens its restrictions on Huawei. Li is a professor of economics and a government advisor. He says 90% of raw materials needed to produce vitamins and antibiotics are made in China, and that the U.S. won't be able to produce them in the near future. His remarks drew harsh criticism.
Li Daoqui's appeal is completely unethical, and no one with a conscience would make such a suggestion. Even if others impose technological sanctions, they will not harm human lives. This is inhumane and worse than declaring war.
Even though China is the world's largest exporter of pharmaceutical raw materials, Doug Barry says media outlets exaggerate U.S. dependence on Chinese drugs. Barry is the Senior Director of Communications and Publications at the U.S.-China Business Council. According to Radio Free Asia, Barry said that although most of the raw material comes from China, raw material doesn't equal the finished product. The United States still controls a significant amount of patented drugs. Zhao Ming, former sales rep from Shaanxi Runze Pharmaceutical Company, says Li Daoqui lacks a basic understanding of domestic medical industry. He adds that the level of purification technology used in China's production process is far from adequate.
API, or active pharmaceutical ingredient productions, rely on the chemical industry and involve environmental issues. It's common practice for developed countries to locate parts of production overseas or import directly. It does not mean that the U.S. depends on imports.
Zhao also explained that China doesn't have any reputable chemical companies and that the U.S. has greater options. Take one of the world's largest chemical companies, Germany's BASF Chemicals, as an example. The company has subsidiaries in several countries, so it's a straightforward process for the U.S. to either change suppliers or resume domestic production. President Trump and Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden have both pledged to move production of critical medical products back to the U.S. It's a bid to create jobs and reduce dependence on foreign manufacturers like China. Dr. Sean Lin says he believes Li Daoqui's aggressive wolf warrior style of diplomacy will only accelerate the decoupling process between China and the West. He says it would be unwise for China to cut off its economic exports.
Czechia's president is working to quell Chinese aggression following a top Czech official's trip to Taiwan. The president is known for his pro-Beijing stance, thanks to a Chinese businessman who served as the president's economic advisor but has since disappeared.
At least one person is getting nervous over the diplomatic clashes between the Chinese regime and the Czech Republic. On Sunday, Czechia's pro-Beijing president Miloš Zeman went on TV to criticize the head of the Czech Senate's recent trip to Taiwan, calling it boyish provocation. The Senate Speaker Miloš Vystrčil made headlines last week for unreserved support for Taiwan's democracy during the trip, making a similar declaration as the late U.S. President John F. Kennedy's "I am a Berliner" in defiance of communism.
Já jsem Tajvanec. Už Taiwanzen.
Beijing threatened that the Czech speaker would pay a heavy price for his visit. Prague summoned China's ambassador over the threat. The Eastern European country is now seeing its foreign policy at a crossroad. A member of NATO and the European Union, the Czech Republic started to lean towards Beijing when its current president came into power in 2013. He had publicly supported the Chinese regime's claims over Taiwan.
There was very bad relationship between China and former government of the Czech Republic. Former government, I stress. This is a restart.
That's thanks to a Chinese businessman who later became the economic advisor of the Czech president. Ye Jianming, a former Chinese oil tycoon, was the chairman of CEFC China Energy. Though in name a private enterprise, the company was able to gain global influence and connection that made even China's state-owned companies jealous. In 2017, the company bought over 14% stake of Russia's state oil giant, third only to the Russian government and UK's BP. And according to a New York Times report, the chairman was meeting with influential Americans, from a former CIA director who later became President Trump's advisor to the then vice president's son, Hunter Biden. And when American authorities started to investigate the company and arrested one of its executives, the first phone call he made was to Mr. Biden's brother, James Biden. When Chinese media asked their secret for success, the company's CEO said its founder Ye Jianming always stressed that the company needs to be, quote, patriotic.
We still need to closely follow the government's policies and serve the state's strategic interests. In the past few years, CEFC China Energy has made some really good strategic layouts in Middle Asia and the Middle East. All of these layouts are to serve the government's strategy.
In the Czech Republic, CEFC set up its European headquarters investing in real estate, a football club, local breweries, and Czechia's national airline. Chinese state media touted the company's big promises of more investment. China's state-owned banks promised to secure funding for the future investment. But things came to a screeching halt when Ye Jianming was arrested in China in 2018. His whereabouts have not been known since. The investments were never fulfilled. CEFC's assets in Czechia were taken over by a Chinese state-owned company at a very low price, leaving the East European country with not much other than a pile of debt. The Czech president's tie with Beijing brought a backlash. The opposition Pirate Party, which takes a tougher approach against Beijing, grew much stronger in the 2018 election, marking a second transition in the country's attitude towards Beijing. Reporting by Penny Zhou, NTD News.
The Communist Party sees itself as a global leader, and it is a global leader in persecution, says Sam Brownback, America's ambassador at large for international religious freedom. American thought leaders host Yania Kellick talked to Brownback about the many ways the Chinese regime wages war with faith, from forced organ harvesting to forced sterilization. He's also keeping a close eye on Hong Kong for signs of religious persecution there too. Here's an excerpt from that interview.
So, recently there have been reports of basically the Chinese Communist Party mandating that hospitals in Xinjiang either abort or even, kill after birth Uyghur babies. I find it even difficult to talk about this, frankly. What do you make of these reports?
I make that they're credible. I make that they're credible reports are, and they're in the numbers. We certainly see that in the numbers of Uyghur children being born dropping precipitously. We have eyewitness accounts of people that have gotten out and have testified now regarding this. And this is at the horrific level. Again, here's China that's holding itself up, the Communist Party as a global leader, and doing this to an ethnic group of their own people. I think this is completely unconscionable, and it's taking place today. For years, the world kind of turned a blind eye to what the Falun Gong was saying about organ harvesting. And people were saying, well, I'm not sure this is credible. And, yeah, you would see it, you'd look at it. It was in the numbers, the circumstantial evidence was there. Now you've had two credible institutions outside of China saying that, yes, this organ harvesting is taking place. And think about that just mentally, that you're taking and persecuting this individual, you're going to kill them, and then harvest their organs to sell them. This is just horrific taking place. And I just don't think the world can now sit back and say, well, we're just not sure if this is happening. That just sounds like what we've done in past genocide, crimes against humanity, ethnic purges, whatever category you want to start calling these things, where we just want to say, I don't really want to confront the factual setting here. I'd rather just not know. I think we do know, and I think we have to act.
You mentioned Hong Kong earlier, and so are you seeing the encroachment on freedom of belief since the advent of this national security law in Hong Kong? And if so, how is that playing out?
I'm not getting reporting on it yet. I look for it to happen soon. I anticipate you're going to start seeing the persecution taking place there, but I haven't had a series of reports coming in yet, and maybe even this interview will stir people up to start sending things in that they're seeing taking place now.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. Thanks for watching, and see you tomorrow.